Little cold this morning. Whoa. A little cold out this morning, but I'm gonna end the year off strong. Gotta finish up this last project, which hopefully I can finish up this week, and then it'll be time for Christmas break. See if there's anybody on that has any questions about welding or inspection, for that matter, or just stuff in general. Oh, that didn't feel very good. Back hurts today. Hello, sir. How are you doing? Oh, I gotta read over there. Oh, man. An early morning for me, that's for sure. Usually there's more activity going on. Thinking about making my TikTok channel a little bit more active. Oh, I don't know. finish my trailer at home. I should be able to finish that this week or next week. Probably next week. This week's a little busy. What am I doing? I am driving. I'm headed into work, but I'm on my way about a little less than 2 hours away from home to hopefully finish up a project that this contractor's working on. I'm a pipeline inspector, so I make sure that they're doing everything they're supposed to and gather all the paperwork. So once I finish this project up, more than likely I will have the next 3 weeks to work from home instead of traveling, which will be a nice little break. Tuesday, yeah. Today we'll be cutting and welding today. X-ray tomorrow morning. Bolt up and torquing. And then probably finish up Thursday, and then we'll flood the line Friday. And that'll be it. Come on now, people. I have to stop and get fuel today again. Ugh. Way. How to make metal stick together? You weld it. Wow. It's a very broad question, so I'll give you a broad answer. Weld it. Many different methods. That's the best way to stick metal together. Matter of fact, when you're welding, you turn two pieces of metal into one solid piece. If you just want to stick it together, you can do brazing or soldering. Can I explain weld? Weld is the action of taking two pieces of metal and joining them together to form one piece of metal. How to do that? There's many different methods. The oldest form is forge welding, where you heat two pieces of metal up in a either coal forge or propane forge up to a temperature where they are not quite a liquid but not quite a solid, and you butt them up together and you hammer them together, and that forms one piece of metal. The next form that came out was gas welding or acetylene welding, which is using a torch with a fuel and an oxygen source, heating up the specific weld area to about the same temperature, 25-ish, 100 degrees or so, and using filler metal to fill the gap and join the metals together. You also have how to do that one underwater welding. So underwater welding is typically the one that everybody thinks about is wet welding. It's basically stick welding in a dry suit. So you wear a dry suit with a hood and a air supply, go underwater, use a special type of stick electrode and a special type of rod holder that is insulated very well. And underwater, you basically stick weld the material together. But there is also a dry form of underwater welding where they send a pod down with you, wrap it around. Now I'm just talking about pipe welding. It wraps around the pipe, seals up against the pipe, pumps all the water out of it, and now it's a dry area because it has an air bubble in it. So you have divers that go down, go up into this pod, and they usually TIG weld underwater. You lied on an application for underwater welding, second interview tomorrow. So you have never welded underwater ever? You've never welded, period. Well, either you're making up a story, because it's very hard to get a job as underwater welder or even an interview in the first place without any experience. And it'd also be very hard for you to lie about it because you don't know the procedures and policies that are in place. You also don't have a scuba license. What state would need a scuba license, picture of your scuba license, in order for you to even get the interview. But let's just suppose that you're not and you're on the second interview. You might as well go in and tell them the truth, because first thing that's going to happen is on the second interview is they're going to talk to you, ask you specific questions about codes, policies, procedures, where you've been, what you've done, proof of it, and then you also have to take a weld test. And if you don't pass that, you don't get the job. So even if you do lie on your resume and you get the interview, you're not going to get the job unless you pass the weld test. Well, honestly, most of the underwater welding companies, most of the welders are part of small family-owned business. It's a small family-owned business. I don't care what they need welding at all for. It's a plastics factory. Well, I mean, manufacturers that make plastics of sorts have metal machines. And sometimes you have to fix them. There's also such thing as plastics welding. It's a little different. It's actually a lot different. Hi. Yeah, so I mean, to fix the machines, you don't need to be as highly qualified. Most of the time, as a maintenance welder, you are going to go in and, you know, do quick repairs on the machines, swap parts out, weld some stuff together. It's not going to be as stringent or as quite as difficult, I guess. So if you go into the interview and talk to them about it and tell them that you've never really welded before, they might work with you. But the one thing I would not do is go into the interview, pretend like you know what you're doing, and then they find out that you don't. Because the one thing about welding that people don't realize is that every weld you make as a welder, you are personally responsible for it, both professionally and personally. So if you hurt somebody because your weld breaks, you could be not only professionally liable, but also personally liable. No. No, I cannot. Well, because if you fix something, you think it's good, and then it breaks and somebody gets hurt, and they also find out that you lied on your resume, you are now personally responsible. Yeah, legally. That's the risk that every welder takes. You could have a civil lawsuit filed against you. And no, the business insurance that the business carries does not cover that. It doesn't cover you, it covers them. Oh yeah. There's been times where welders have welded pipelines together and maybe they paid off the inspector or the x-ray tech was in on the scheme and they let a weld pass that shouldn't. It failed, caused millions of dollars of damage, and everybody involved was held personally responsible. Hell, in one of those instances, I know at least 2 inspectors that went to jail for at least 10 years. Well, I mean, that's the chance you take. You know, be confident in your work. Don't ever do something that you're not confident in. The one thing I tell welders all the time, especially in the pipe, natural gas, oil industry, if you're asked to do a weld and you're not 100% confident in it, don't do it. You're better off not doing it and taking that backlash than you are to do it and fail. Responsibly on the fly? No. That is not something you learn. If you get a job as a welder and you go, I'll figure it out, you're in a whole world of hurt because there's a lot of bad habits that you can pick up that you don't realize. That's good. I know there's a bunch of people that are naturally good at it. Matter of fact, I've had a lot of students come in, never welded a day in their life, give them a little bit of instruction, they pick up on it and run away with it. I've also had some people come in that think they're the best in the world, and they're horrible and can't pick it up. I've had both ends of the spectrum. Yeah, welding's a very serious career. It's very serious. It's like a doctor can be held personally responsible if they botch a surgery. Yes, coordination, consistency. A lot of people will tell you need a steady hand. I'm going to tell you right now, you don't need a steady hand. I have the most unsteady hand imaginable, and I can weld pretty good. So it's not steadiness, it's consistency. Fastest somebody could become competent at welding, well, it depends on a lot of things. It depends on what you're welding. It depends on the seriousness of it, the severity, what type of test you have to take, process, your own aptitude. Yeah, sometimes a day, sometimes months. I would say the same thing, depending on what you're doing. If you were in a factory making truck bodies and you're welding mud flat brackets on, I can teach somebody to do that in a day or two. If you're learning to weld pipe, if you're consistent at practicing, 9 months, maybe longer, depending on you. Yeah, welding mud flaps on. You go into a assembly line, they bring trucks to you. You're welding brackets on. You got a MIG welder. The settings are already set. And just go. Well, adaptable is good because you have to be adaptable as a welder. But there's a lot that you need to learn. Because if that welder jams up, if that welder stops working, you got to know how to fix it. If you have to use a different wire, depending on the process that you're doing, you're gonna have to know which wire to grab. If you might have to use different shielding gases. You have to know the pressures that you're gonna have to run. Well, if you don't know any basics, you're gonna need a couple months to learn the basics. Because you've got different welding processes, you've got different types, you've got different filler metals, you've got a shit ton of practice. Yeah, you can get a job, like I said, welding mud flaps on a truck. You don't need to know much about the welding process in general, you just need to know how to run a MIG gun, but you're making $15 an hour. Okay, now you're getting into something that takes years to master. Because TIG welding has a lot of different parts to it. It's two-hand coordination plus a foot sometimes. Yeah, absolutely serious. Because you got different tungsten electrodes that you're going to use. You have different gases you're going to use, different cup sizes, different materials, different preheat sections, different post-heat if there is any, different filler metals. Square wave, you got to learn how to adjust your square wave if you're running AC. You got to know what pulse is. No, the foot pedal is for the amperage control. So your amperage has to vary depending on what the piece is doing. Yeah, I'm a of all the processes that I've used, stick welding is probably the best process that I have. I stick weld almost everything, but I also learned stick welding first before I learned anything else. I mean, you can go to the second interview, but you're gonna have to tell them the truth and, let them know what you know and don't know. Maybe they'll work with you. Maybe they'll teach you. That's what happened to me. I didn't lie on my interview. I just told them that I was a welding student looking to learn how to weld, and they asked how much experience I had, and I told them none. And they said, all right, well, come on full time. We'll teach you how to weld. Now I'm watching other people weld. Well, in all honesty, if you're not into welding, then you shouldn't do it. Welding is a career where you have to love it to be good, because it is tough grunt work. If you want a 9-to-5 job where you're working 40 hours a week, welding's not the way to go. It's going to be feast or famine. You're going to have 60, 70-hour weeks, sometimes overnights, and then other times you're going to be sitting still. At least in my experience. It can be tough if you manage it right. All right, let me ask you this. How old are you? $23. Okay. So, best advice I can give you is, if you want to do blue collar work, in my opinion, the best thing you can do for yourself to give yourself the best option is to get on with some sort of construction company and start off as a laborer or a helping hand or something like that. You'll still make relatively decent money. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but you'll get exposed to a bunch of different things. So if you're working for a commercial construction company, you're going to have welders around, you're going to have crane operators, you're going to have foremen, you're going to have masonry, guys doing rebar, cement, a whole bunch of things you're going to be exposed to. And then find out what your interest is, and you'll naturally figure it out just by spending time around these guys. And then eventually you'll be able to kind of focus on the direction you want to go. Yeah, and that's a good point. Get close to a seasoned guy that's been around for years, and if you're good to them and they're the type of person that wants to share information, they'll share everything with you. Those are the best guys to learn from. I can guarantee it. I learned from a younger welder, but I also learned from an old seasoned welder as well. And some of the tricks that I learned from them, I would have never learned in a classroom or any sort of instruction. Everyone was on meth. It's not like that anymore. I don't know what type of construction company you were on, but we have to be pretty clean. I'm talking commercial construction. I'm not talking about building houses, residential, or small stuff. I'm talking warehouses, big buildings, hangars, oil and gas industry, stuff like that, mechanical contractors. We have to be clean. I mean, even though marijuana has been a lot more lax in the United States, if I were to get my medical marijuana card, I wouldn't be able to work for the company that I work with. They wouldn't allow it, period. As soon as I get that, I'd be out. And I get randomly drug tested, I would say probably every 2 or 3 months. Yeah, probably not, because it's very highly controlled. I don't know much about residential construction at all. But as far as commercial stuff, this big stuff, it's very, I'll call it highly regulated. That's the best thing I can come up with. I bet you could. I bet your neck was itchy. I don't own a rig, no. I used to. Well, not really. So I worked for a mechanical contractor. They supplied the rig. I'd go pick it up from the shop and go wherever they asked me to go. And then I started working for a natural gas company where they paid for the rig. And then as I was working for the natural gas company, I was going to break out on my own. Or no, before I welded for the gas company, I was going to break out on my own. And so I was collecting my tools and stuff to build my own rig, and then I got the call from the gas company to work for them, and I didn't need to build a rig anymore. So I never owned a complete rig. And as far as my full-time job, I do not pipe weld anymore. I am a weld inspector. So I don't weld in the field like I used to. I miss it. But then on days like today where it's 19 degrees out and we have to go weld today, I'm kind of glad I'm not. And then the other days where it's like 100 degrees out, I'm also very glad that I'm not. How'd I get into inspecting? When I was welding pipe, when you work for oil companies and gas companies, any of the bigger jobs that you do, at least at the time that I was welding, any of the bigger jobs that you did, you had a welding inspector that was basically in charge of the job. And at the time that I was welding, the CWI had a lot of we'll call it a lot of power as to what to do on a project. So what he said went. And I had one inspector that I was working for, and I had a couple before this, but this one specific job, the inspector was a really nice guy and was giving me some tips on welding and stuff. He was a welder himself. And I started asking, I think I was 19 years old, maybe 20. And I started asking him a bunch of questions about inspection because I didn't know anything about it. All I knew is that he was there to watch and make sure that I was welding the way I was supposed to, following the procedures, using the right rods, storing everything correctly, cutting everything right, all that stuff. So I started asking him about inspection, and he gave me a lot of good information as to what to expect as an inspector, and got to talking to him for a while. And I think what really sold me is after the job was done, so he's not allowed to solicit, he's not allowed to like befriend me, invite me over, anything like that until the job's done. After the job's done, it doesn't much matter. So after the job was done, he invited me over to his place just to, you know, sit and talk a little bit and explain what he does. So he lived out of a fifth wheel trailer, and this is not a little camper. He had an F450 towing this thing, and it was like I think it was a 56 or 54 foot triple axle, and it was a mini house on wheels. And it was a toy hauler, and instead of having, you know, most toy hauler trailers, they have you know, maybe a dining area that folds up to put a motorcycle or a small car in. No, this thing had its own separate garage, which was awesome. And I just asked him, I said, why I asked him, how can you afford all this? And he said, well, one, inspectors make a lot of money, but also two, he doesn't, because he travels so much, he doesn't own a house. He lives in his camper. He has a P.O. box at home. He has a couple properties here and there that he invests on. His home address is a piece of property in, I think it was Louisiana at the time. And the only reason why was for tax reasons, basically. So he lived out of his camper, spent 9 months out of the year traveling the United States working, and if he found a place that he liked, well, then he'd set up camp for a while and stay there. And then when it was time to move, or he got a new job, or his business manager would call him and say, you got to go here, you know, that's where he'd go. So after seeing that life, I was kind of like, you know, that would be really awesome to retire to. And then the more welding I did, the more I realized that because of my own personal health reasons, if I were to keep doing welding full time, it would more than likely cause irreparable damage to my body. Not because that's what welding does, but that's because that's how my body is. I suffer from very serious migraines. I've had a lot of health complications in that respect. And come to find out that for whatever reason, that light will cause me to have migraines after a while. So I can only weld for so long. And after realizing that, and realizing the fact that welding is very physically demanding, I had decided that maybe I should look into get my CWI license. And 5 years ago, I took the test and passed it. So then I started getting into the inspection world. Started off inspecting bridges for Department of Transportation as a third party. And then once a position opened for a company that I've contracted for quite a lot, they were looking for company weld inspectors, and I jumped on it because there's two different ways you can go about inspecting that I've noticed, at least in the oil and gas industry. One is you can be a third-party inspector where you're either doing a 1099 contract or you're working for a firm, and they make a shit ton of money, but it is not guaranteed consistent work. So yes, I could make $300,000 a year if I worked every day available, but that's not feasibly possible all the time. So I don't get paid quite as much, but I have a salary. So if I'm sitting at home because I don't have an active job, I'm still getting paid. Plus I do a bunch of other things for the company as well. So, how hard is the test? It's tough. I'll tell you that much. It's not an easy test. It is something I would definitely study for. With somebody who has 30 years experience, I'll be honest, sometimes the experience can actually hurt you in the test, because just like any other test, it's not necessarily what the best answer is, it's what the best answer they think is. So, it's dependent. If you've been working for 30 years under the same welding code, you probably have a little bit of an advantage. Part of the test requires you to get an endorsement under the code that you work. So you have to take Part A and Part B. Part A is general knowledge of welding, and that's all processes. That's MIG, TIG, stick, laser, electrobeam, friction welding, all that. You have to have a general broad knowledge of it all. It's not as hard as it sounds. Part B is the practical exam, where they give you some random made-up code that the book came up with, and you have to inspect weld coupons to that specific code and decide whether these welds are good or not. What do you see, what do you don't, stuff like that. And they're not like, if undercut's allowed a 1/16 of an inch deep and as much as 1 inch in each weld, it's not like it's going to be obvious, at least in my experience. For example, there may have been one coupon that, the code says it allows a 1/16 of an inch of undercut deep, 1/2 inch wide, and what I measured was like 3/32 of an inch deep of undercut. Is it allowed or is it not? Well, it's so close that, am I getting my measurement wrong or not? That's how close it is. And then Part C, the third part of the exam, is your endorsement. So you use a code book, you pick the code book that you want to get the endorsement to, and the test is based on that code book. So you have an open book test that you have to navigate the code book to answer the questions. It'll ask you to find something specific, or give you a scenario and you decide whether it's acceptable or not, something like that. So the test ain't easy. And you have to know stuff about welding procedures, how to write them, how to qualify them, what paperwork do you need to keep on record, things like that. So it's not an easy test. But if you think you can do it and you want to do it, I would definitely recommend it. I mean, the worst thing you can do is try it. It's not a cheap test. It's kind of expensive, but get all the right study material, and take the either online course or the in-person course, or both, like I did. Give yourself time to study, and you can pass it. It's really hard, but it's not impossible, that's for sure. And as far as welding being a load of crap, I got news for you. Everything you've touched in this world has involved welding of some sort, whether it was put together by welding or the machines that made it. It's all welded. Sorry. So could I roll up on a structural job being an inspector? Okay, yes, I am in pipe. So I work for a pipeline company and I inspect welds and projects for them. And yes, so even though I have my endorsement under API 1104 code book, my CWI does still allow me to inspect structural jobs. So like I got my endorsement through 1104, and that's what my CWI license reflects. But my first inspection job was bridge fabrication. So yeah, I can, as a CWI, you can inspect anything in the United States, pretty much everything welded. Technically. As long as the company you're working for is okay with it. Like if I were to, so technically speaking, I am qualified to inspect aerospace fabrication. Will I? No. One, because I don't know much about it, but also two, the companies that do aerospace welding probably wouldn't want me anyways, because I don't have any experience in aerospace. But I am technically qualified to. Industry? What do you mean industry? That's just a statement. Yes, D15 is for bridge, structural bridge. Yes, I've gotten to learn that code book. I'm an expert at it, but I know it and I can navigate it. What state am I in? Right now I'm in New Jersey, but I live in Pennsylvania. That's the one thing about being in this industry, at least in the oil and gas specifically. There's a lot of money to be made, but I would be prepared to travel. It's just the nature of the business. Now, I get kind of lucky since I work for the company and I'm a company employee. They do their best to keep me within a general location. So they try to keep me within 2 hours of my house. But there will be those times, and there has been those times, where I have to go further than that. I was in Ohio this summer, and I was also about 3 hours away for the rest of the summer. Unfortunately, that's the negative to it. But if you want to travel and do that stuff, by all means. I have a young family, so it's hard for me to do it. But I know a lot of inspectors that either their kids have grown up, moved out of the house, and they're, him and his wife want to travel, and they just pick up and go, and they go everywhere in the United States. A lot of inspectors do that. Matter of fact, I was just working with one on the previous job that I was on, and he was a guy that was of retirement age and collecting his retirement benefits, I think. And he would travel anywhere in the United States for a job, and his wife would come with him. That's what they did. Thank you. That's true too, unfortunately. When the partner's on the road, even though things are okay at first, sometimes minds change. Yes, I've seen that a lot myself. So unless your partner's fully on board with it, I would say proceed with caution. Yeah, kind of the same way. I mean, how my my wife's not fully on board with me traveling, because when we were younger, not married and had a house, I was a welder that was traveling all the time. And what I was hoping for is to get a position where I didn't have to travel anymore. And I didn't travel for 8-9 years. Kind of got used to it. And then now I'm traveling again. Not as much. When I first started this job, which was early summer, maybe late spring, I guess, it was not looking good, because my first job was 6 hours away or 5 hours away, and then the second job, which was like 4 months, was 3 hours away. And you know, I'm not driving 3 hours to and from, so I was staying up there, and it wasn't looking good. Both of us were pretty upset. She was very upset. But now that they've kind of, one, we've hired a lot more people, but also two, I've had the last 2 jobs that I've been on have been about 2 hours away or so, and I'm getting home at a reasonably decent time, so it hasn't been so bad. And two, they usually try to give me time in between jobs, so I don't jump from, you know, being in the mountains for 4 months to, you know, going through the city for the next, you know, within the next 2 days. You know, they usually give me 2 or 3 weeks home first. At least I try to. It doesn't always work out, but they're definitely trying as much as they can. That's all I can ask. Well, I appreciate it. Stay safe. We're almost there. Sun's starting to come up. this is where I got to end it. I can't have you guys seeing where I'm going, unfortunately, but thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more like this. I try to go live every once in a while, and I'll see you later.